This next segment, talking about animals, is going to be talking about the insects. And the insect group I'm going to be focused on here is the order called the Hymenoptera. The Hymenoptera, ptera means wing, and so it's hymen-like wing. It has to do with it. But really, the Hymenoptera are the insects that are ants, and then the flying, stinging insects that we often know as bees, wasps, yellow jackets, and hornets. So both of those groups of insects are grouped together partially due to wing structures, but for here, what's important for us is all of those insects have varying amounts of the same toxin. So these insects, some ants, many wasps, bees, yellow jackets, hornets, it's just easier to say Hymenoptera than all of these things, they get grouped together because they get treated together. The biggest problem with bee stings in general is that set of reactions called anaphylaxis. I'm not going to talk about anaphylaxis here. It's very important to understand, but it's the biggest consideration for bee stings. I don't know if ant bites do it very much, but bee stings and bee bites, but particularly bee stings. The reason for it, by the way, is that when bees sting, they deposit their venom deeper into your tissue. So it just is it's stronger acting just because it's not on the surface of you, but it's actually below the subsurface of your skin. It's a little bit deeper in. So anaphylaxis, ana means up, phylaxis means protection, like prophylactic. And anaphylaxis is really called, it means like up the protection because your immune system goes haywire and can kill you. About 50 people a year die in the United States due to the anaphylactic reactions to bee stings. It's something to be discussed at another time, but for right now, I just want to make it very simple. Carry an Epi-Pen. If you think you're going to be around anybody who has an anaphylactic reaction, a couple of things, by the way, create anaphylaxis. And another time, perhaps we can talk about, I can do maybe a voiceover and talk about what anaphylaxis is, but really what it is, it's an excessive response by your body. It's not the sting. It's your body's response to this thing, and it kills people. So what I suggest is learning how what I'm suggesting is understanding, getting a good background understanding of what anaphylaxis does as far as difficulty in breathing, and then shock where your blood pressure drops. Those are the two parts of anaphylaxis. And carry an Epi-Pen, which administers epinephrine intramuscularly. And the epinephrine counters most of those effects. Learn how to do that, carry one. So I'm not going to cover anaphylaxis here, but that's the biggest fear with bee stings. And people who have bee stings and are sensitized and get anaphylactic should carry their own with them and maybe show other people who they travel with how to use them. So I hope that makes sense. Study anaphylaxis. And now we're going to continue on the more common problems associated with these bites and stings. The main problem with ant bites and bee stings and honeybees and wasps is that it's a venom, and they all have varying degrees. It's pretty much, they all do it a little bit similarly, but the makeup of each venom is a little different. So a wasp venom and a honeybee venom and an ant venom, you know, if you took apart the constituents, they might have the same things, but in varying levels. And that's why we react to them similarly. And the reason we act stronger to bee stings often than ant bites is, once again, it's the stinger. It just gets injected deeper into us, and so we can have a stronger reaction. The reactions are two kinds, basically. They're local and systemic. The local reaction is just usually a lot of local pain. The systemic reaction is an allergic reaction to the venom, where you might break out into hives and have more intense itching further out than just where you get stung. So I'm not going to speak to the allergic reactions now. I want to speak about the local responses, the local reactions we have to ant bites and bee stings. So the local reactions to these are basically sharp pain if you've ever been stung. By the way, a lot of these, while ants only bite, a lot of these other bees and wasps, etc., they also bite as well as sting, and they can inject it either way. So the local response tends to be a sharp pain. It's really sharp. I mean, getting stung by a bee is it's a sharper pain than many others. So sharp pain, redness, tenderness, and swelling. And sometimes you get a small raised bump called a vesicle. If you're allergic to them, if you have an allergic response, so that's a venomous response. Most people have that. If you have an allergic response, you might have what's called a wheal or a flare response, a wheal, W-H-E-L, and it's just going to be more raised and more itchy. And if you're very allergic, that can spread out further, but still not anaphylaxis at that level, just a more systemic or a less localized allergic response. So I'm talking about getting stung by bees and hornets and wasps and getting bit by occasional ants, so those tend to stay very local. Let's just go to treatment. So you were stung by something or bit by an ant and it hurts. Because that's really what's happening. It's painful, it hurts, it's red. You know what happened because you brushed it away, you saw it sting you. I've not seen them sting me because occasionally I've inhaled them because I smell flowers. John just made a crazy face, but it's true. Like sometimes, well, I haven't ever gotten stung in my nose, but I have gotten stung in my mouth because sometimes I'll just grab flowers and eat them, like red clover flowers. So I'm walking around and eating them, and you know, some of these honeybees are small, and all of a sudden they're in my mouth, and I mean, I would sting me if I was in my mouth. But I've never swallowed them because that would be a pretty terrible feeling. I don't really know what happened because the esophagus is peristaltic. I don't know if I'd really swallow it. Anyway, I'm suggesting, which what I do now, this is a little off subject, before I eat and smell flowers, because I've almost gotten stung in the inside of my nose, is I blow on them. So let's say I come up to some nice smelling flower, I'm going to eat some prunella flowers, self-heal, I'll just go, and then I pick them. So I just blow on them because it almost always annoys the bee that moves around, and so I know that I'm not going to eat it because I don't really want to eat them anyway. I can get protein from other sources. So usually you know that you were bit or stung. Sometimes with ant bites you don't know it initially, and all of a sudden, because you're like, ow, 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 and you look down and you know you're standing in an anthill. So the first thing to do, of course, is to separate yourself from the situation. You know, get away from the bees. Bees, by the way, but they also put in, they put in alarm response chemicals when you get stung, especially if you kill a bee. And then we'll talk about honeybees in a minute. Other bees smell that out, however they smell it out, probably with their antennae, and then they chase you. I mean, if you kill a bee on you near a hive, it will chase you. Not all bees live in hives, but those that do can chase you. It's usually the ones, by the way, that live in hives often that sting, because they're basically set up as protective defenders of the hive. All right, so I'll stop into all the philosophizing and naturizing of the bees and move to honeybees. I hope some of this is interesting for some of you. Honeybees, which are very common bees, I think Apis mellifera, but anyway, the honeybee, which is not native, it's one of the only ones that actually leaves its stinger in you. And so we're going to start there. If you get stung and you do the treatments that I recommend in a minute, and it still hurts, there's a good chance that you have a stinger in you. In the past, so when you get the stinger in you, I'm going to draw on this board for a minute, show you Raising the Herbal Army, and then this, and there's Arfra again. When you get stung by a honeybee, lots of bees, when they sting, sometimes the stinger comes out, many it doesn't. I mean, you have to be a hive creature, you have to be a social creature to be willing to die for everything else. Like if you were a solitary, like a carpenter bee, and you stung and died, it wouldn't help anything. But if you are a social creature and there's thousands of you living together, some of them's job could be to sting and die, because the rest of them will do everything else to keep the hive alive. So honeybees are social creatures. And what they have is a little barbed stinger, and then they have a little venom sac on the end. When the bee stings, when they pull out, this little barb stays in you. Actually, you can often see a little trail, by the way, of intestines. It pulls basically their guts out. When they pull away, they're dead. I mean, they're going to pull out, they're going to pull their stinger out. It's not just their stinger, it's the whole abdomen, parts of it come out. If you look carefully, you can see other parts. And then you still have the venom sac in you, and that venom can still squeeze and put venom in you. If you get stung by a honeybee, it can hurt for a while because the stinger is still within you. So if you do these remedies that I talk about and it still hurts, you might still have the stinger. Previously, the suggestion was it's still a good suggestion, was to get the stinger out in a special way to not crush the poison sac. But recently, the venom sac, the newer stuff that I've been reading, I read a bunch just recently about it, and they said it doesn't really matter, just get the stinger out as soon as possible. So in the past, people would say be careful to not crush the venom sac, which is very small, by the way, and to slowly get the stinger out when you can. These days, it's do whatever you can to get it out. So I'm going to talk about how to get it out. So the way that people like best is to use the flat edge of something and you push it out. So if I got stung in my arm, so I just get stung in my arm. So what happens a lot is I just tend to show parts. So if I got stung here, for instance, this is a common place people get stung, it seems. If the stinger was here, I'd start here and I take this is the it's the non-sharp edge of my knife. You can use a driver's license, or that's the most common thing, by the way, is using a laminated hard card. What you do is if the stinger was here, right there, let's say, because you can see it where the stinger is sometimes. You take your knife and you just, the flat end of the blade, and you push, and it will push out the stinger. And if you do it that way, and it comes out, and it often does come out, it pops out and you don't crush the venom sac. Because when you crush the venom sac, it hurts a little bit. So, but of course you can use sharp tweezers. And so if I have it, I can also just pull it out like this. The reason previously they said not to use tweezers is because if you're not, you can grab it by just the stinger. I don't have a stinger in me, and pull it out and not crush it. But they used to say don't do it because if you crush the venom sac, then you get more venom and more pain. So if anaphylaxis sits around this whole thing, I'm not talking about anaphylaxis, but it's a part of this deal. Because for some people, they have a very strong allergic reaction and then go into shock and have difficulty breathing and could possibly die. So that's a separate subject to study. So I'm just talking about if you don't get anaphylactic. You might get allergic reactions, though. But these days, they say just pull it out. So they being the authorities that write all over Wikipedia and other websites. But you can definitely get a tweezer, go at the very base, press down. These are sharp, so they work good. Press down and just grab by the stinger and pull up. But once again, these days, people are just saying if you have sharp nails, just pull it out. So previously, you didn't pull it out with your fingers because then you're definitely crushing the venom sac. But what I'm going to say here is I'm going to go along with the modern recommendations and just get it out as soon as possible. Tweezers are, so the first one is you get something and push it out, see if that works. You could try tweezers, and you could just try pulling it out with your fingers or anything similar. So only honeybees leave the stinger in, but honeybees are common, right? So on to the next part, how to treat. So with bee stings, sometimes you have allergic responses. I'm going to try to we'll cover somehow in this course, whether it's video or not, how to deal with allergic responses. So I'm not going to talk about systemic allergic responses. I just want to talk about what to do locally. Because one plant, and I mentioned it in my run bag, one plant works remarkably well for the pain of getting stung. And that plant is, is tobacco. I said nicotine, I meant Nicotiana, which is the genus of tobacco. So tobacco, whether it's Marlboro or Virginia Slims or American Spirits, they all work, and they work phenomenally well. And the way you use them is a spit poultice. You take it, it's disgusting flavored, all of tobacco. That tobacco is just strong. So I usually use a processed tobacco, all the ones I mentioned, as opposed to getting a leaf from a garden. Because I grow tobacco because it's just beautiful flowers, the ornamental tobaccos. So basically, you take a Marlboro, let's say, and you open it up, and there's a lot of chemicals in there, it's true. But they're very common. Lots of people have tobacco on them, unfortunately. And you just chew it up, and then you chew it up a little more, and then you just put it directly on there. And once again, if you get stung and it's a local reaction, get tobacco, chew it up well, make a spit poultice, put it on topically, and it really helps reduce the pain. I mean, sometimes it just makes the pain 0 in seconds. So whatever it is, I mean, in my mind, I think nicotinic receptors, acetylcholine, pain responses, I don't know. But tobacco works. The most common plant that other people say to use, and I have used and works some of the time, is plantain. There's a bunch of plantains. The genus of plantain is Plantago. So plantain, so I tend to use the two non-native plantains, Plantago major, Plantago major, the broadleaf plantain, and Plantago lanceolata, the narrowleaf plantain. And they do work really well, but tobacco works better. So, but they'll definitely work. They, by the way, are also drawing agents. So same thing, you get bit or stung by one of these critters, take the plantain leaf, a lot of you know this already, take the plantain leaf, just chew it up well, and nice and sloshy and spitful, and then you put it on the sting. And often that will reduce it right away too. So those are two plants to use. So there's a couple of other plants. So tobacco is my favorite, though disgusting flavored. Plantain is pretty effective and very common. Other things to try include Nephtalium, which is the cudweeds, and pussy toes, Nephtalium and pussy toes, cudweed and pussy toes, which is Antenaria. So they might sound foreign to you, but pussy toes and cudweed are actually pretty common plants in a bunch of places in the United States. And you can chew them and put them on. I haven't tried them. I use those plants as gentle anti-inflammatories, by the way. Pussy toes, which is Antenaria, and cudweed, which is Nephtalium. They're both good demulcent and gentle anti-inflammatories. But some folks have told me to try those, so I haven't. So you might want to try pussy toes or cudweed, Nephtalium or Antenaria, if you're around them. And some people use chickweed poultices. Chickweed being Stellaria. Stellaria media is the most common of the chickweeds. But they're all very gentle and demulcent, and it's worth a try. So another one I haven't tried, but I'm around chickweed, and most of us are around chickweed if we live in wet climates. And so you might also want to try putting chickweed on it. So I'm going to say all those again. Tobacco is my favorite because it just clearly reduces it fast. Plantain, you can't find tobacco growing generally. There are places in the United States, so you have to, somebody has to have it. But plantain is a very common plant. Chew that up and put it on. And then the other ones I've suggested have been the pussy toes, the cudweeds, and the chickweed. So all of those last three are worth a try. They don't taste bad, so the worst that happens there. Once again, if you put them on and it doesn't help, especially tobacco, I would say you might look to see if it has a stinger. If you're looking for the stinger, there might be a big red area. It's the epicenter. If you have your 10-power loop, often you can find the little stinger in them because, instead of just doing a lot of card rubbing or a lot of tweezering, you want to find it. But generally, usually the way that a bee sting spreads out is very circular and kind of out from the middle evenly. So you're going for the epicenter of that region. And I think that's it for bee stings and the Hymenoptera stings and bites. I hope you got a little something out of it. There is some information that's interesting, how bees and ants use similar venoms, how bees deposit it deeper, and hornets and wasps with their stingers, and to use tobacco and plantain, basically. You can also use internal agents like pain reducers or anti-inflammatories, skullcap or valerian. But really, you just want to try to see if you can reduce it topically by putting these things externally. So thank you.